communicating our research as well as getting information that we need safeguarded and stuff like that. So since sometime last year, we've had webinars on cybersecurity regarding equipment. We've had one on scientific presentations. That was the last one that was delivered by Professor Dokas Obrieboa from UCC. Today, we are also very lucky to have another very, very astute researcher from the University of Cape Coast, in the person of Professor Samuel Essien-Baidoo. Professor Essien-Baidoo is an associate professor in laboratory medicine and a fellow of the West African Postgraduate College of Medical Laboratory Sciences. Just to keep it short, I'll also just add the fact that he is also the founding head and the former head for the Department of Medical Laboratory Science at the University of Cape Coast. I'm sure there are a few other things he's hiding from us, so he will brief us as he takes the stage to do his presentation. But today he will be speaking to us on effective scientific writing. I believe this also focuses mostly on writing articles for publication. I'm sure probably there'll be others that he will touch on. So Professor Baidoo will be taking us, Essien-Baidoo will be taking us through some slides, and then post that we would have, I'm hoping, some breakout sessions to look at, to have some Q&A, but these sessions are designed so that we have a maximum number of people having the opportunity to interact with our facilitators and get some direct feedback in terms of what the theme or the subject for the presentation has been. So at the end of his presentation, we would go into at least a maximum of 3 breakout groups, have some interactions in those groups, and then come back together to round up the webinar and close. So I would invite Professor Essien-Baidoo to take over, to share his slides, and to begin the presentation. There are a few people on that we will welcome at the end, and also task with some activities. So Professor Essien-Baidoo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kojo Kusi Asamoah, my president. So this is my face. I believe you can see me. My name is Samuel Essien-Baidoo, and I have the privilege to share with you this morning, this afternoon, some issues on scientific writing. Let me quickly share my screen so that we begin. I'll try as much as I can to make the session very brief so we can have a lot more time to interact and discuss some of the things that I may be putting out. Scientific writing begins with the notion that you have a scientific paper that you want to publish. And so we're talking about a set of ideas, original ideas that comes from probably some research that has been done in terms of reviews, experiments, literature search on any topical issue that you would want to put out there for colleagues, particularly within the field or the domain, to have access to. And in a journal or other source documents that would be readily available to the scientific community. But the first thing you do before you write why you want to publish your work and whether it is publishable. Is it something that you want the rest of the world to read or to know about? I have a couple of colleagues that I work with who are clinicians who do a lot of interventions that are very novel, but they have a lot of difficulty in sharing that with the rest of the world. One of the most significant ones was done recently at the Cape Coast Teaching Hospital, and it found its way into the New England Journal of Medicine. And it was significant because the knowledge that it contributed to the particular procedure is gained a lot of attention worldwide. And that is what scientific writing is about. So you need to decide on what type of article or manuscript that you want to write, what type of scientific paper you want to write. There are quite a number of them that you can consider. So for instance, if you want to write a full article, there's a way of going about it. If you want to write an original article, there's a way of going about it. You can also write letters or rapid communications or short communications to editors of journals. And all of these follow the same format, actually. So having thought about why you want to publish your work, why you want to share that information with the rest of the world, then you need to, first of all, choose a target journal. You need to pay attention to the structure of the paper that you want to write in relation to where you want to publish that paper is. So journals would require a number of things. For instance, journals will tell you the number of words, the font types that you should use. Journals would give you an idea of the submission checklist. So you need to be abreast with all these author guidelines before you begin writing your paper. You need to be sure that you have reviewed all these guidelines to be in the known of what the requirements are, so that once you begin the writing process, you make sure that you have covered all the issues relating to the paper that you want to write. Again, generally, most scientific publications cover the IMRAD format, which would include your introduction, your methodology, your results, your acknowledgement, abstract, all those things, and then in a lot of instances, your discussion, which is very important. And so if you look at what is in vogue, a lot of journals would require that your paper would have a title, which should be very short and informative. Your abstract, maximum 1 paragraph, 200 to 250 words in most cases. Your introduction, which should be very brief. And then you spend a lot of time on your methods, your results, and then the discussions. These are things that you need to pay attention to, particularly when you are preparing to write a scientific paper. The paper should be such that it should not be too lengthy. If not, it would make it boring. People will not have time to read the paper. And so you're looking at managing whatever communication you have within maximum about 20, 22 pages, including references maximum, so that you can attract a lot more audience to reading the paper and to also using the paper for future research and other things. What I'm going to talk about today is centered on these 11 things, which I think we need to do when we're writing scientific papers. And these things are very, very important. To write a scientific paper, you need to first of all prepare your figures and your tables. Then you go ahead to describe your methods. Then you write up your results. Then you write your discussion, your conclusion. Then you come back to write your introduction. The abstract is almost the last thing that you write. And then finally, you look at your title. Now, I've arranged this in this order And I'll explain to you why I think that this is a very good approach to writing scientific papers. Now, if you agree with me, pictures usually are very impressive. There's a graph on your left, on the left side of your screen. If you look at this graph, if I presented the same data in a tabular form, it will be very difficult for you to appreciate the disparities between the bar charts and then the differences that exist between the parameters that I'm talking about, or that is being represented in the chart. So in preparing your figures and your tables, you need to decide on which ones to use. The ideal thing to do is to have your tables, and then you proceed to draw your figures or get your figures done. What is usually advisable is that you have to look at 2 or more figures. So either you're doing bar graphs, or you're doing bar charts, you're doing dot plots, scattered plots, or line graphs. And then out of this, including the table, you ask yourself, which one tells a very good picture? Which one illustrates what you want to communicate? Because you see, the data that you have, which you want to write about, is the driving force of your paper. So depending on how you illustrate that data, it would either attract attention or it would not attract attention. So occasionally you look at some papers, you realize that when you get to the results section, it is very flat, it is boring. You probably will not have to take a calculator and then check the difference between some figures here and there and all of that. That is too much work for a lot of people. So you need to prepare your figures and your tables and then decide on which ones to use. Generally, tables would give you the actual results, whilst figures usually will give you the opportunity to compare results and, more importantly, to show probably a trend that you have observed in your research and things like that. So you need to play with this and see which of these will tell you a very good picture. But this is the very first thing you do before you write a scientific paper. Analyze your tables nicely, get your figures done nicely before you proceed. Now, one of the things you need to note is not to duplicate data in the manuscript. So you cannot present data as both table and then figure or graph. So you need to choose between one of them. You need to also avoid crowded plots, especially in situations where the data set is so huge that if you use a graph or a figure, it will distort and will not clearly show whatever trends and whatever angles that you're looking at. Then you need to avoid that. You need to think about an appropriate axis label to use, particularly when you have to scale the axis such that the least value reflects properly with the highest value in the data set. That is very, very important. So again, one of the things you should not do is to use long tables that go beyond a page. What will happen basically is that if someone is reading your paper, they may have to come back to the previous page to check the heading before they make references to the rest of the table that is on the next page. We call that orphan tables. The tables are orphan because they don't have headings. So what you do if you have a very long table is basically to break that table. That is, if you want to use that table, what you need to do is to break the table into subsections. So you can have table 1A talking about a certain construct, table 1B talking about another construct, and let's say table 1C talking about another construct, but within the same bigger frame. And that is very, very important, particularly for a lot of reviewers and a lot of editors to consider. Again, you need to be mindful about the font sizes of your table. The journals will tell you what font size to use, how to format your table so that the values that are expressed in there are not too small for the readers to see. Once you're done preparing your tables and your figures, and you have selected the ones you want to use, then you come back to describing the method. This is where you give broad summaries about how you went about the research, how you collected your data, how you did your analysis, how you did your systematic review, amongst many other things, and all of that. So you need to list the methods in the same order they appear in the results section. So if the first part of your results is talking about how you collected demographic data, for instance, in the sciences, how you collected demographic data, then the first part of your methodology or your methods should describe that. So if your next table is talking about probably a cross tabulation or an analysis between one parameter and the other, then in the methods, it should follow the same way. So you need to synchronize the tables with the methods. And that is why it is always important that you prepare your tables and your figures first. Then you arrange them according to the story you want to tell, and then write the methods accordingly, right? And then write the methods accordingly. Now, in writing your methods, do not forget to describe the site. If it's a prospective study, if it's a retrospective study, you need to indicate that. Describe what experiments were done, giving information on the dates when the experiments were done, amongst many other things. The methods that you use, how you handled your samples, the analytical methods that you use, you need to describe them. It is not enough saying that I use this analytical method without making reference to. If you actually referenced another paper or another material or another source. So you need to describe all of these things in detail. Again, you need to describe the statistical methods, including whatever confidence interval, standard deviations, what non-parametric and parametric analysis you did, amongst many other things. You need to describe all of this. What you see in most manuscripts that are being prepared or that are prepared in the early stages is a lot of writers who say that data was analyzed using this software and that software, without telling what specific analysis was done. A lot of reviewers, a lot of writers, a lot of the people who would want to read your paper would want to appreciate the kinds of analysis that you did, because it also allows other people to try to replicate your study. So it is important that you describe the statistical methods that you use. And you need to avoid making comments and introducing results and discussions in your methodology. Your methodology is not another literature review. So this is not where you want to introduce literature to justify why you chose a particular method over another one and the benefits of quantitative research over qualitative research, and this is a normative approach and things like that. No. Stick to describing only the methods that you have used, including how you sampled your population, how you came about your sample size, amongst many other things. These are the things that you need to put in your methodology. So your methods strictly would describe the things that you did prior to obtaining the results, Then, having done that, you now would have to come and look at your table and your figures and then write up what you have found. Results should be essential for discussion. And again, in doing so, you should not also forget what journals offer in terms of how they are usually flexible for you to add supporting materials. So in writing up your results, what you can do, if you have too many results, you can select the ones that are relevant and the rest can come as supporting materials. And that is acceptable by a lot of journals. The other thing a lot of people fall short of is the attempt to hide data in the hope of saving it for another paper. We call it data splicing. So you do the research, you collect data, you think that the data set is huge, and so you want to split the data into two and then write two papers out of it. You need to be careful about things like that. I mean, growing up in the scientific environment, I remember myself and then two other junior colleagues, we did a study and we felt that the data was huge. And so we published one aspect of the study. And then when we submitted the second paper for the other aspect, it was rejected by almost all the journals that we submitted it to, because they said that they had published something similar in this journal already. Then we told ourselves that we could have published the entire results, which would have yielded a much bigger impact if we had not spliced the data. A lot of journals would not accept when you splice data and you want to save data to publish this separately here and to publish the other one separately there, right? Do not include references in your results section. Again, you can use subheadings to keep results of the same type together, as I mentioned earlier on. So where you have orphan tables or orphan figures, you can avoid that and then use subheadings to keep them together. There are a few statistical rules you need to obey, especially when you're writing your results. You can use median and standard deviation to report normally distributed data. You can use median and inter-percentile ranges to report skewed data, amongst many other things. Again, if you're going to use decimals, it is always appropriate to limit it to not more than 2 decimal places. Now, when you're done preparing your table, you've described your methods, and then you have written out your results. The game changer is the discussion. It is a discussion of your scientific paper that makes the paper what it is. It is the marketer of your paper. How well you write your discussion depends on what sort of information you have been able to gather together. So in your literature search, all the literature review that you have done, all the information that you have found out are best suited for your discussion more than the introduction section of your scientific paper. If there is anything anybody would want to find out from the data sets that you have acquired, it is about how well you are able to make meaning out of the data set. So the first thing you need to write is your discussion before you go to think about the introduction. A lot of people don't read the introduction section because it only provides background to whatever you have done. What people are interested in is the discussion bit, how you attribute reasons to your findings here and there. A lot of reviewers and editors will reject manuscripts because the discussion is weak. The discussion is weak because it only compares one phenomenon to the other. So in our study, we found that this was done, and then it agrees with another study from here, it disagrees with another study from there, and then it ends it. That kind of discussion is usually weak. Because you're looking at trying to interrogate your findings, to give and ascribe reasons as to why a particular construct or a particular phenomenon changed, improved, or decreased in your study cohort or in your study environment. And so the discussion should correspond to the data set, but should not reiterate the results. Some people just repeat the results in the discussion without giving reasons why they observed probably an increase in a trend or a decrease in a trend, or they saw something that was different to what a lot of the literature had reported. So it is always important that in writing your discussion, you compare what you have with what has been published previously. There may be instances where you find out things that are novel, that nobody's done, that you do not have enough literature to discuss. That is also acceptable. You need to go around that in a very nice way by making sure that you have done a very good literature review. And if you say that this thing that we are reporting is novel, then indeed it is novel. Again, you don't have to ignore studies that disagree with yours. What you need to do basically is to confront those studies and then convince the reader about your results. This is very important. So sometimes you see in the literature search, you realize that there has been a number of studies that do not agree with your findings. And then some people get dejected. Some people get dejected and then they give up, and then before you realize, they put the paper aside and things like that. No, you need to confront. So do a bit more of reading, find out what is it about my study that disagrees with this other study? What is it about this other study that disagrees with my study? And these things are very important, particularly when it comes to the discussion. So avoid statements that go beyond your results, that goes beyond what your data set can support. Don't use unspecific expressions like higher temperature, significant, and things like that. Avoid sudden introduction of new terms or ideas. You must present everything in the introduction to be confronted with your results. Again, one of the things that usually a lot of people fall short is speculations in the discussions. Yes, it is allowed. You can speculate things like that, but your speculations should be rooted in facts. It shouldn't be based on imaginations. Be sure to discuss the weaknesses and the discrepancies of your results and your research, and try as much as you can to explain why there are discrepancies, there are weaknesses in your data set. And always ask yourself, is there another way to interpret your results other than what you have done? And so in writing the discussion, you need to spend a lot of time to review a lot of literature, compare a lot of things to be able to ascertain what needs to go into interpreting your results. And you can explain these things without exaggerating in a lot of the instances. Then you now would have to come and conclude. So this is a section where you show how the work advances the frontiers of knowledge or the study that you have conducted. So you need to write a clear conclusion, and a lot of reviewers and readers will find it difficult to judge your work if the conclusion is not properly written. If your conclusion is bad, a lot of people would find it difficult to judge your work. One easy way of writing your conclusion is to go back to look at the objective of the study and then match that with the results or the data that you got, and then the meaning you made out of the data, and then what your final take on all that process is. So you can just look at your result, your objectives, and then based on the objectives and then the findings, I conclude that, yes, indeed, when you add this to that, it gives you that. And in the conclusion, nothing forbids you from suggesting future perspectives, future experiments, and you need to point out this to readers. Again, you need to also share with people if you have started looking at the other things that that particular paper did not address. And that is very important. You need to share that with the scientific community. And so it is important that in writing your conclusion, you are also suggesting future experiments, future perspectives, things that you were unable to cover in your write-up or in your research, and asking people to also contribute to that. When you are done with all of this, then you come back and then you come to write a compelling introduction. So in this section, you provide a background to readers, people who probably may not have a very good understanding of the subject that you're writing on. So you start from the global perspective, narrow it down to the main issue or the main area that you created or that you conducted your research in. So it is in this session that you try to bring readers to appreciate what your work is about in terms of providing some background information. The introduction must be organized from a global perspective. I mentioned that. You need to introduce the main scientific publication upon which your work is based. So in the social sciences, for instance, you need to talk about your conceptual framework and indicate the particular scientific paper or the scientific knowledge that the work is based on. This is very important. In the health and clinical sciences, we usually shy away from writing conceptual frameworks and designing theoretical and operational frameworks and things like that. But you can introduce that particularly in the introduction as the main scientific theme upon which your work is based on. So if your work is based on antigen-antibody interactions, what is the main theme? What has been reported? So there's a scientific publication that talks about antigen-antibody interactions, and then that becomes the main theme upon which your paper particularly is based on. So you introduce all of those constructs, particularly in your background. Now, a good introduction should answer 4 or 5 simple questions. What are the problems to be solved?
That's what you want to say.
Some people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Hello, kindly mute so that. So a good introduction would try to answer 4 or 5 questions. The first question your introduction should be answering is, what is the problem to be solved? Are there any existing solutions which is best? What is the main limitation of what you're trying to put out there? What do you hope to achieve? Long introductions will put readers off. Earlier on, I mentioned that 1.5 page long, because you're only providing a background to the subject matter. And it's important that your introduction is kept short, brief, but should contain all of these things. You should clearly state the purpose of the paper, the research strategy that you've adopted to answer the question, and things like that. And it's very important. So let's say you're done with all of that. So your table is set, your results is described, your discussion is excellently done. You've gone back to write your introduction. Then now you need to come back and then put everything that you have done into a very short piece, which would be the signature of the scientific paper that you want to put out there. This signature paper is the abstract and is very short. Depending on the journal in which you're publishing, a lot of journals would give you the scope between 150 words to 250 words. So the abstract is what you did, what the important findings of your research were, and how those findings were concluded upon. So the abstract together with your title is actually the advertisement for your scientific paper. If anybody would read your paper, they first of all will look at your topic or the title, and then we'll go through the abstract. If the abstract is good, then they will now would want to read the full paper. So in writing your abstract, you need to make it interesting and easily understood. So you try to refrain from using a lot of scientific terminologies and jargons and things like that, and you stick to using very simple, straightforward language. It should give key results and minimize experimental details. So in the abstract, you're not rewriting the methodology in full, no. So you're only indicating in the abstract that this method was used, this analysis was done. But the abstract should focus on the key results, the key findings, the key discussion, and the conclusion. The abstract should have an introduction section or a background, one statement, maximum one statement. The abstract should have an objective. So the main objective of the paper. So there's a background that is provided, the main objective of the paper, then an overview of the method, one statement should be fine. And then now you go to your key findings. And then it is always important that your abstract should offer a short description of the entire paper. It should be the interpretation of the entire paper, which should also carry the conclusion, because it is a conclusion that would attract people in a lot of instances to read the paper. Now, this is where it gets trickier for a lot of people. So people would compose titles before they begin to write their scientific papers. And then when they are challenged with discussing their findings, then you realize that they go back to change the titles. What I have learned from practice and what a lot of scientists have recommended is that you write your title last. So you have an outlook, you have described your results, and you've seen the trajectory of the description of your results. You've gone through over and again, you've written your introduction, you've written your conclusion, then you now can compose your title. Your title must explain what the research is about in its broader terms. The title should be an opportunity to attract another person to read your scientific paper. Remember, there are so many publications. Virtually every now and then, people publish a lot of scientific papers. But what would attract them to read your paper, to make your paper relevant, is the title and then the abstract. And so in formulating your title, you need to coin it such that it would attract anybody who sees it at a glance. So you should keep the title very informative and concise. It should be clear, it should be descriptive enough, it should not be long. Don't let the title be too short and don't let it be too long. I would recommend not more than 15 words in your title. Keep it very short, very informative. Avoid technical jargons, abbreviations, if possible, in your titles. And always make sure that you dedicate some time to reflect on the title and discuss it with your co-authors. So what we have done in practice over the period is that we propose titles, or we propose a title and then we float it around. And then the co-authors or other colleagues who have contributed to the scientific paper would read the paper over and then again and then agree on the title. So the final title that is put out there is a title that is agreed on by all those who have contributed to that scientific paper. And that is very, very important. So you need to finish doing all of this before you write your titles. Then, of course, you need to select keywords for indexing. So your keywords is what will be used in indexing your paper. So for instance, if someone wants to read your paper, they can put your keywords together in a search engine and then it will pull the scientific paper out. So they also are labels of your manuscript. So avoid words with broad meanings in your keywords. Don't use too many keywords. Only use abbreviations that are firmly established. So for instance, CDC, WHO, don't create your own abbreviations. Again, check the guide for authors for the particular journal that you want to submit your paper to, and be guided by the requirements in terms of the number of keywords that you can use amongst many others. Then, of course, you need to show appreciation. So you need to come back to thank the people who have contributed to the paper or the manuscript. And again, here, you want to appreciate people who have founded. If you received some funding for the research that you did, you need to acknowledge them. A lot of funders would require that you state the grant number or the grant ID in the acknowledgement, amongst many others, and things like that. You need to make sure that you do all of these things. Again, some institutions probably, where institutions give support in terms of giving you access to the institution to conduct the research or to use their premises or their laboratories and many others, you need to also mention them in the acknowledgements. It is very important. There may be instances where some people may have contributed to the scientific paper writing process, but did not take part in the research itself. They need to come under acknowledgement. I remember I reviewed a paper for a senior colleague, and then he asked and how you went about the research. All my contribution is in the acknowledgement, and I think that is where I need to be. And that is very important, because lately there are issues of gift authorship where people have not contributed to researches, but then they find their names as part of the authors. And sometimes when you ask these people to speak about some of these papers, they find it difficult to speak about some of these papers and things like that. So yes, if you only edited the paper, I'm sure that should be enough for you to feature in the acknowledgement section, and you take it like that, because that is your contribution to the paper. Then you come back and make sure that all your references are properly done. Fortunately, there are a number of softwares that you can use in writing your references. So you can use EndNote, you can use Mendeley, you can use Zotero. I think Mendeley and Zotero are free, so you can download that. What you do basically is that this software allows you to cite whilst you write. This software allows you to cite whilst you write. And so if you make a statement in text, then you can cite, and then it will pull up the full reference at the end of the text for you nicely and things like that. Again, you should be sure that you do not overinflate the manuscript with too many references. I mentioned that earlier on. Avoid also excessive self-citations, amongst many other things. And then, if possible, try as much as you can to compare your work to what has been done in other regions and other jurisdictions apart from your local area, to give it a wide readership. Now, having done all of this, there are some important language issues that you need to consider. Remember that poor experimentation cannot be masked by a very good writing. But however, poor writing can mask a very good experimentation. If you collected very good data and you write poorly, then you realize that that poor paper may not make it to the shelves for others to read. So in doing so, one of the things you need to do is to avoid complex sentence structures, use simple and clear English, and always keep in mind that the paragraph is the essential unit of thought. So every set of paragraph should contain a set of ideas that should be very important, particularly in the paper that you're writing. Aim for short, succinct sentences. For instance, if you say the purpose of the pre-test was to assess the questionnaire, that is 10 words. But you can just rewrite this by saying that the pre-test assessed the questionnaire, 5 words. It makes your paper very succinct and short. Phrases should be replaced with single words whenever possible. You can also delete uninformative words and use one word to replace phrases and things like that. And avoid grandiloquence. I read a paper from one of the African countries. I had no option than to put a dictionary aside so I could understand the meaning of some of the words. It doesn't make you enjoy reading a scientific paper. So you need to avoid grandiloquence. That is very important. So I've put together quite a number of phrases that you can use one word to replace and things like that. So for instance, at all times, you can just say always. At the current time, you can say currently, now, based on the fact that. You can replace that with because. Does not include. It means that it excludes. So there are quite a number of them. So somebody say, in the light of this, so considering this. In the absence of, without. In the course of something. That means whilst or during. So these are things that you can use. So there are so many of them. And you see this in a lot of manuscripts. Look closely at, if you are looking closely at something, you are examining to find out whether you are examining, you are exploring, you are assessing. On daily basis means that it's daily. So these are a few of the things. So there are so many examples. You should avoid redundancy to make sentences succinct. Invited guests are guests. If you say large in size, it is still large. Red in color, blue in color. You're talking about the color blue. Added bonus, it's still a bonus. If you merge something together, what have you done? You have merged. So you realize that if you write your manuscript and then you take time to delete some of these uninformed words, you do what we call the sentence redundancy, then you make the paper even more readable and more acceptable by a lot of people. You need to also consider your punctuation styles. Your subject-verb agreement should be good. If you're not a language person, you can always employ someone who is a language person to help review your paper and then point out some of the subject-verb disagreements that would exist in your paper. Thankfully, now there are softwares that can help you do this without hustle. So you can use Grammarly. If you're done writing your paper, you can pass it through Grammarly. It will check all these punctuations, subject-verb agreements, and other things for you. You need to also avoid informal wording and addressing your readers directly. I've talked about using jargon, slangs, superlatives, amongst many others. In terms of constructing your paragraph, if a paragraph is nearly a page or more, then it is probably too long for the reader to particularly contemplate and on what you are actually talking about. So your paragraphs should be short in most of the instances. Do not use too many abbreviations in your write-up. It makes it difficult because then people would have to go and refer to the abbreviation and come, oh, okay, so this is it, right? And then never start a sentence with a figure or an abbreviation. These are a few of the things you need to pay attention to. Now, having done all of this, you need to also confer with what has been published already in the journal where you want to publish your paper. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the author guidelines are very important. You need to be abreast with the author guidelines. You have access to a paper that was published. You look at how the paper was formatted, how the references were done and all of that. And then you format your references accordingly. There are different referencing styles. So each of these journals and papers have their own referencing styles, and you need to format your paper to conform to that. You need to make your scientific paper legible for reading. Again, the author guidelines and the journal will give you an idea of what font types to use, what font sizes to use, and all of that, right? That is very important in terms of that. Now, you need to avoid some general mistakes. So start each new section on a new page to avoid orphan headings. I mentioned that. Divide tables or figures if possible. When submitting a paper, you need to make sure that the paper is properly ordered. So make sure your page numbers are clearly stated in there. Your page numbers are clearly stated. Adhere to word limits that are prescribed by submit your paper to, and always make sure that you proofread your paper a number of times before you submit them. And what you need to do in all these instances is to make sure that you spend some time to go through, use paragraph to separate important points, present your points in a logical manner, avoid the use of non-textual elements and other things that would make the meaning of your write-up difficult. So as I mentioned earlier on, proofread your paper, eliminate unnecessary words, and then review your reference list. My take-home message would be that, number one, you need to write to communicate. You don't need to write to impress anybody. You'd want to communicate something to the rest of the world. So your writing should be targeted at communicating to people. You need to follow instructions of the paper or the journal that you want to submit your manuscript to. And then you need to gather plenty of suitable materials or information for your paper. It is always important to do a comprehensive literature review before you begin to write your paper. Organize the information clearly, set aside blocks of time for writing. So draw up a timetable. Okay, so I am writing my discussion this week. So I know that this week I am putting all this effort into reviewing all these papers to write my discussion. That is very important. And in writing, always keep your audience in mind. Write readably, credit your sources adequately, and please revise, 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 and revise. But lastly, let me also say that you need to understand and avoid publication ethics. So issues of plagiarism, issues of falsification, data fabrication, improper use of human subjects, using another person's idea without proper attribution should be on top of your mind so that you do not commit any of these ethical violations in your scientific writing. Thank you. And over to you, Professor Kojo Asamoah Kusi.
Yes, thank you very much, Prof. Essien-Baidoo. I think that is been very informative, very interesting. I have picked up a few tips to help me in my writing as well. So thank you very much for that. Audience, so because we want to make this easy for everybody to ask as many questions as possible, what we're going to do next is to break out into 3 separate rooms to have a facilitator in each room, and then Prof. Essien-Baidoo will go around the different rooms to respond to specific questions. So we're going to automatically split the group into 3, and then we will have some Q&A. There will be a facilitator in each room who would help respond to questions or comments. And then when we are done for about 30 minutes, we come back into this general room and round up. And of course, if there were any key questions and responses in any of the groups that merits everyone, getting that information, that will be shared when we come back to the general room, and then we can round up from there. So please, you'll be added to one of the 3 rooms. Just stay in that room, and then when the 30 minutes is over, and I'm expecting, so let's say 35, you can come back around 12:30 into the general session. So whichever room you end up, just be there. Prof. Essien will come there at some point. You spend roughly 10 minutes in each room, and then you can have some discussion and question and answers on what he has presented so far. So I'm creating those rooms now. And